The next item of business is portfolio questions on finance and local government. I note that question number 1 has not in fact been lodged. I call question number 2, Finlay Carson.
To ask the Scottish Government how much it will allocate in its budget to housing associations, including to support them to meet their aids and adaptations targets.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robison.
In my Scottish Budget statement last Wednesday, I confirmed that the Registered Social Landlords Adaptations Programme budget for 2025-26 is £20.9 million. This significant increase from the £8.245 million budget for 2024-25 reflects our commitment to support social landlords to deliver necessary adaptations, will help tackle delayed discharge as tenants will return home quicker from hospital, and ensures disabled people can live independently at home for as long as possible. The budget bill is still subject to the parliamentary process and is likely to conclude by the end of February 2025.
Finlay Carson.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Having previously raised questions about the significant cut in the budget for aids and adaptations, I of course welcome the fact that the Government has increased it to just under £21 million, but it's still way short of what housing associations want. But I can ask the Cabinet Secretary if clear advice can be given as to whether money can be used to fund supported modular living accommodation that can be lifted and dropped into position and then moved again. Current guidance appears to be a grey area at present. With recent significant improvements in technology, such as modular, movable and bespoke accommodation, we could go a long way to ensuring that the current bed blocking crisis being faced with NHS within Scottish hospitals is addressed, and also lead to improved outcomes for many patients.
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I first of all welcome Finlay Carson's welcome to the increase in the budget. The figure arrived at was with some discussion with the Registered Social Landlords, but obviously we keep these discussions open. In regard to the specific ask around supported modular accommodation, I think that's something I'll maybe either myself or colleagues will write back to Finlay Carson about, because it is quite specific, but it's something we'll certainly look at.
Supplementary, Willie Coffey.
The increase in funding available for adaptations is really welcome. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how the Scottish Government's response to the housing emergency in some parts of Scotland is addressing not just the number of affordable homes provided, but the quality and accessibility of those homes, so that everybody in Scotland can have a warm, safe place to live that meets their needs?
Cabinet Secretary.
Increasing affordable housing supply is important, as it is delivering the right homes in the right places and ensuring that they're both high quality and accessible. New build homes delivered through the Affordable Housing Supply Programme must, as a minimum, meet housing for varying needs standards. Where possible, new build homes must also meet a number of additional quality standards, including having space for home working and study, having private or communal outdoor space, and being digitally enabled. We do, of course, want everyone in Scotland to have a warm, safe place to call home.
And supplementary, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary is able to say when housing associations would receive notification of the amount of their individual allocations for this year's budget. They only fairly recently received that figure, which meant some tenders for work were no longer valid. So I think the timing of that information would be really crucial as well.
Cabinet Secretary.
I do appreciate the point that Mark Griffin is making, and I think we would want to ensure that registered social landlords receive the information as quickly as possible. And I'll make sure that's relayed.
Question number 3, Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its progress towards creating a planning hub.
Minister Ivan McKee.
The housing planning hub that I outlined in my statement to Chamber in November is currently being established. We're working with stakeholders to identify initially stalled housing sites in the region for these delays, and this will allow us to prioritise actions for the hub to coordinate, including brokerage support and providing access to expertise. And a short-life working group has been established to drive this forward. In addition, the hydrogen planning hub, which I launched in September of this year, is being led by the National Planning Improvement Champion. This is now actively supporting planning authorities around technical and other issues to do with planning relating to hydrogen. Indeed, I met with the National Planning Improvement Champion this morning to discuss this issue.
Megan Gallagher.
Minister, we both received a copy this morning from an SME house builder, and I believe the house builder eloquently stated the current state of our planning system in Scotland and decisions obviously taken by this government that's made it incredibly challenging for our SME house builders. The last time the Scottish Government undertook a review of the planning system in Scotland, this resulted in the Planning Scotland Act 2019 and MPF4. And since both of those have been in place, there's been a decline in house building delivery, loss of house builders, decline in the number of construction companies and the declaration of a housing emergency. Scotland is now a hostile environment for anyone in the housing industry. So can I ask the Minister, what role will the Planning Hub have when looking at these particular issues that are really important to our housing sector? And how much will the Government invest overall in the Hub to prevent these issues from reoccurring and the Hub itself becoming a talking shop?
Minister.
Well, first of all, in terms of the planning system, I'm absolutely determined as a government to make the planning system as responsive and effective as possible to enable us to position Scotland as the most attractive part of the UK to attract investment into housing infrastructure and indeed energy. And we're taking forward that work at pace. And the measures I outlined in my statement to the Chamber last month identified the actions that we're taking to ensure that indeed does take place. And the member should of course recognise that the NPF4 and indeed the planning legislation of 2019 were passed by this Chamber, recognising the important step forward that they identified in terms of a plan-led system, which is hugely important to make sure all the competing asks of the planning system are properly balanced. With respect to the Hub itself, that was in response to asks from the sector, which we were very keen to respond to and to do so at pace, accelerating the establishment of the Hub. And the sector, working very closely with the sector. As indicated in my answer, the work around the Hub is to identify initially stalled sites, the reasons for those, understand the generic systemic issues that are causing stalled sites, and then to take forward solutions to that. Recognising, of course, that there are more than 160,000 housing units in Scotland already have planning permission but are not being built out by the industry. So and planning consistently on an annual basis is processing and approving more housing units than are being built out by the industry. So this is a combination of a number of factors. It's not all down to planning. Planning will play its part, but there is an awful lot of housing units out there that already have planning permission that haven't been built.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. Question number 4, Evelyn Tweed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how its 2025-26 budget will support public services.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Budget sets out this Government's proposals for renewing our public services and delivering hope for Scotland's future. This includes protecting and improving our NHS, allowing councils to deliver the services that people rely on, ensuring that staff in early learning and childcare are paid at least the real living wage from April, and in continuing policies that have seen levels of crime fall by 40% since we came to office. And as I said last week, if we want this support for our public services, then Parliament has to vote for the budget.
Evelyn Tweed.
Stirling is a large constituency with urban and rural communities which often have different challenges. How will the investment in public services benefit the wide and varied needs of communities across my constituency?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, the allocation to Stirling Council in particular will be made in due course as councils get their notification of their allocation. But I do believe that this allocation will, including a real terms increase for the general revenue grant, that is discretionary spend, will help the many differing communities that Evelyn Tweed has narrated within her constituency, both those within an urban setting and those within a rural setting. This budget will help to ensure that the resilience of our public services is there for that variety of communities.
Supplementary, Michael Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And it's telling that SNP backbenchers think this is a question that even needs to be asked. But little wonder with Scotland's NHS in crisis. Hospitals have already declared critical incidents and real fear as to what might happen when winter deepens. But there's nothing in the budget that really takes our public services in a new and better direction. The IFS, the Fraser-Vallender Institute, clear in their reactions to the budget that the Government has failed to seize the opportunity for reform. So what does the Cabinet Secretary have to say to the General Secretary of the STUC, who said the budget fails to tackle tackle the big transformative challenges Scotland faces and dodged the critical decisions we needed to see.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what I would say to the STUC and others is this is a budget that invests in our public services, a record investment in our NHS, a record investment in local government, providing resources that of course will help to ensure that our investment in public sector workers, which means we have a larger public sector and better paid public sector, will be able to be sustained. And I'm sure that's something that the SGC would welcome. The question for Michael Mara and his colleagues, though, are they going to vote for or against that investment in public services? It's a very simple question.
And supplementary, Ash Regan.
The imminent additional costs to Scotland's critical public services from UK Labour's brutal hike to employer national insurance contribution will have an acute impact on our Scottish NHS by £191 million, our Scottish Fire and Rescue Service by £5 million, and Police Scotland by £25 million, which is the equivalent of over 800 new police salaries. So does the government agree with me that resource-abundant Scotland cannot continue to thrive by merely mitigating damaging UK policy, and that we must chart our own path through to independence?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, we on these benches believe absolutely that the best constitutional future for our country is independence. And let me agree with the point that Ash Regan is making about the employers' national insurance contributions. The core cost for just the core public sector in Scotland is estimated to be around £550 million. So that would leave a £250 million shortfall because the UK Labour government is not recognising the larger size of our public sector and in fact that we've invested in public sector pay. But that's before, of course, you take into account the other services that are an integral part of our public sector, like GP services, like social care commission services, like our third sector organisations that provide vital support to our public services. So this issue has a long way to go, presiding officer, because we will be making sure that we are pressing the Treasury to give a fair settlement for Scotland in terms of employers' national insurance contributions.
Question number 5, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to address the reported decrease in levels of satisfaction with local government services.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, despite the ongoing fiscal challenges, I was pleased to set out a strong and fair settlement for local government in Parliament last week. The 2025-26 local government finance settlement provides record funding of over £15 billion, an increase of just over £1 billion compared to the 2024-25 settlement. Local authorities are essential partners in the design and delivery of public services, and there is, of course, more for all of us to do to get across to people the great job that councils and indeed government does in meeting the needs and interests of people and communities. But I think that this budget will help to do that.
Richard Leonard.
Well, can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but she can't escape the fact that public satisfaction with public services in Scotland has fallen from 65% in 2010 to 40% in 2022. The impact of the underfunding of council services year on year is clear. The First Minister's own local council, SNP-led Perth and Kinross, has already provisionally agreed a double-digit council tax rise in April. Councils like SNP-run Falkirk in my own region is contemplating big tax hikes and big rises in charges to plug a long-standing financial hole. Meanwhile, across the country, libraries close, educational provision is diminished and social care services are run down. After 17 years in office, is this what a budget for progress looks like under the SNP?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think not putting £1 billion of additional money into local government is not going to help any of those things. So that's the first thing. And the only way £1 billion of extra money goes into local government is if this budget passes. So that's the first point to Richard Leonard. The second point is I don't recall any of the discussions with Labour having demands for more than £1 billion of extra money for local government. Now, if that is Labour's central ask, then I'm willing to hear that, but I don't recall that ever being mentioned. So we'll continue to put the resources in to local government. I do believe that that will help to ensure that council tax rises are kept to a minimum. This includes £289 million of discretionary funding through the General Revenue Grant. And actually, COSLA themselves have welcomed this funding and this budget, which has not always been the case in other years.
Parliamentary Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is welcome that the 2025-2026 budget provides local government in Scotland with £1 billion uplift and record funding. So can the Cabinet Secretary further outline how this additional investment will address key local priorities and deliver the public services that people need and deserve?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, thank you to Emma Harper. Just to reiterate what I've said earlier, that this budget would provide record funding of over £15 billion, an increase of just over £1 billion compared to the 2024-25 settlement. Importantly, it includes that general revenue grant of discretionary spend, £289 million. It also removes £500 million of ring-fence money into the baseline and includes additional capital funding, including £40 million of Scotland, all of which has been welcomed by COSLA. And I think if the organisation representing local government can welcome the budget for local government within the Scottish budget, then perhaps members across this chamber can also do likewise.
Supplementary, Alexander Stewart.
Officer, no wonder levels of satisfaction have decreased when budgets have continually been squeezed by the SNP, with councils having to do more with less year on year. Therefore, Cabinet Secretary, how can you allege local government is getting a fair deal when councils the length and breadth of Scotland are having to decimate services, close facilities and raise taxes?
Always through the Chair. Cabinet Secretary.
Gently point out to Alexander Stewart, we're about to have a debate from the Tories that actually calls for £1 billion of tax cuts. The same, so you can't have £1 billion of tax cuts and then come to this place and demand more money to local government. The £1 billion of tax cuts would literally take the £1 billion of increase for local government away. You can't have both. So you have to decide whether you want your £1 billion of tax cuts or whether you want £1 billion for local government. The Tories really need to get their line straight here.
Question number 6, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the total funding allocation is for Inverclyde Council for 2025-26.
Cabinet Secretary.
The local government finance settlement will provide record funding of £15 billion for 2025-26, a real terms increase of 4.7%. Provisional local authority allocations will be published in the local government finance consultation circular on the 12th of December, which is when Inverclyde will know what the total funding allocation is for the coming year.
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the Finance Secretary.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank the Finance Secretary for her reply. And year after year, we have heard Labour councillors in Inverclyde calling for more money to be given to Inverclyde Council without highlighting which budget the additional resources should come from, as it's not their job to make that suggestion. So it was interesting, however, to read that the new MP for Inverclyde and Renfrewshire West now agrees with the SNP Scottish Government, as he provided the exact same rebuttal to the Tories in one of his recent columns. But will the Finance Secretary comment on discussions with the UK Government regarding the funding allocated to the Scottish Government for 25-26, and if at this stage our Parliament has a clear indication of every penny of funding that we are to receive?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I first of all say that we are on record of having welcomed, first of all, the reset of the budget for 24-25 from the UK Government, which is essentially how the Chancellor described it, because there have been years of the budgets not keeping pace with inflation. So that reset of budgets was very welcome. The 1% increase in 25-26 is also welcome, but I think the point I would make to Stuart McMillan and others is we need to see sustained investment here. So the spending review that is coming next year for both resource and capital capital will be absolutely fundamental, because a one-year budget doesn't fix 14 years of Tory austerity. So it remains to be seen whether we see a trajectory of continued investment in public services. That's something we will certainly continue to raise and press the UK Government for.
Question number 7, Paul O'Kane, who's joining us online. Mr O'Kane.
To ask the Scottish Government when it plans to publish the next medium-term financial strategy.
Cabinet Secretary.
The publication of the 2024 Medium-Term Financial Strategy was initially delayed by Parliament needing to, first of all, appoint a new First Minister, and then by the UK pre-election period. I'm actively considering the timeframe for fiscal events and publications in 2025, and will update the Finance Committee early in the new year. I intend to return to the usual schedule for the medium-term financial strategy, recognising the important role it will play in pre-budget scrutiny for the 2026-27 Scottish Budget.
Paul O'Kane.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. The Fraser O'Allender Institute have stated that it was, and I quote, near impossible for them to calculate the funding position ahead of the 2025-26 budget due to the lack of the medium-term financial strategy. And I've heard what the Cabinet Secretary has said by way of excuse for that not coming to the Chamber. But I do think a failure to produce a medium-term financial strategy in 2024 was deeply disappointing. And I think it's important that we don't see excuses for failure to produce this next year. Indeed, the Auditor General called for it to be published at the earliest opportunity. So does the Cabinet Secretary accept the comments of Fraser O'Allender and that failure to publish a strategy has hindered transparency of the public finances? And can she be any more specific on the date in 2025 when she will publish?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we did, of course, publish some medium-term financial information, but I think the point is that when you have a UK government changing and coming in, and actually the spending positions significantly changing, having a medium-term financial outlook based on old information from an old government is actually very challenging, because the budgets were substantially reset when the new UK government came into office. And of course, the multi-year spending review next year is going to be critical in terms of the outlook for both resource and for capital. So I want to get us back into a regular routine of medium-term financial outlook, but I think we have to recognise that when we have major changes in the spending outlook and political changes that we have seen, then that does impact on the financial information that we can put out. But as I said, I will update the Finance Committee in the new year as to the schedule of that publication going forward.
Thank you. I cannot, in fact, call question number 8 because the member was not present at the beginning of this portfolio, which is, of course, expected, and indeed came in over 13 minutes after this portfolio had started. So I thank the Cabinet Secretary, and with that, that is the conclusion of portfolio questions on finance and local government.